Hello, and welcome to the Hormone Genius podcast. We're happy to have you here. Jamie and I have an important thing to talk about today. We're going to talk about body image in relationship to our hormones, but mostly our relationship to us as women, how we feel about ourselves and our body, and the common struggles that many women go through adolescence into their early reproductive years, struggling with body image, and maybe some for many years after that. It's just such an important topic because I think at some level it affects everyone. But for, smaller segments of people, it's going to affect them in deeper and even more medical ways, you could say, where eating disorders develop and actual things that can really harm the body are there. And I don't think we talk about it enough. And so I think Jamie and I both have some personal kind of testimony to it that we want to share to let our listeners know that this is something that all of us struggle with, and we just want to be open and kind of dive in a little bit into this issue.
Totally. And this is something too that it's this, if you've ever heard of the phrase vulnerability hangover, it's so funny. My friend talks about that a lot. She's like, oh, I have a major vulnerability hangover. Like if she felt like she overshared, at like a Bible study. And I never heard of that phrase, vulnerability hangover. I think it's
funny.
But it is true, like where I think when we can share our own stories, it makes connecting a bit easier. And also maybe after you listen to this episode, Teresa and I are going to share a little bit of our own personal struggles and just the importance of being aware and talking through this and getting help through this. But hopefully you'll feel inspired in a sense to get help if this is you, in terms of the struggles we're going to introduce and things like that.
Yeah.
So there may be a little bit of a vulnerability hangover, but
I love that phrase. That's really fun. So in light of that, I will share a little bit just about myself. So if you listen to the introductory podcast on me, you would have known that I was an athlete growing up. And I played like every sport humanly possible. My dad was an athlete, so he just put us in everything. But the sport that I ended up playing the longest was soccer. I was a soccer player all the way through college. And I didn't struggle so much with body image until probably I got to the point of college, I would say. And that's where it kind of hit for me. I realized, and I think it was the first time I was away from home and my family. And so you've got emotional things going on. And, for the first time ever, I had gone to an all-girls school and I was, living where men were, and just the whole dynamics of my life had changed dramatically. And so you're dealing with all of that. And I realized how important it was for me to be good at something, to be good at soccer, and to feel good about myself in that, but also that other people were watching me. And I almost felt like this pressure then that I needed to be a certain way. So in that, I started to get a little bit more obsessive about how much I exercised, even outside of my, traditional practicing and stuff like that. I would end up in the gym. I'd be lifting weights. I'd be going on extra like running or walks that would last for hours. And I find myself, even in my bedroom doing buns of steel. I don't know if any of you are old enough listening to remember buns of steel or thighs of steel, but I was doing that in my dorm room in college.
Thing that you put in between your thighs, like
I totally had that.
Yeah.
Whatever that thing was called, you put between your thighs and you squeezed. I can't remember what that was called. Oh my gosh, I forgot about that, Jamie.
Did you feel like it gave you a good workout?
Oh, totally.
Did it? Oh,
totally. Yeah. Actually, maybe I'll figure if there's one still available. I don't know. But anyway, so I got really obsessive about exercise. And then this is in the 90s, and we got into the low fat craze, where, fat was bad. And I remember, never wanting to eat fat. So I never ate anything like a hamburger or a steak, anything that looked like real food, basically. Like I avoided, and I ate all carbs. I would eat bagels and muffins, and then I would go to TCBY and, get yogurt. I mean, it was just laden with sugar, which now we know is the exact opposite of what is healthy. And so I started to focus in more on low fat eating. which was not good. And then I even ended up having a period of time in college where I started to become bulimic, basically, and wanting to throw up food. And that period of time was probably the shortest. So I would say the bulk of my issues was over exercise or a compulsion with exercise that actually lasted for years after college as well. And I continued to have to work on that. But once I was out of college, I met my now husband, and he became aware of my kind of obsession around things and my concern about my body image and how I looked and worrying about gaining weight. And he said, I think you have a problem. And it wasn't until he said, I really think you should get counseling, that I was willing to address it. So it took, and this is often, I think, of all of us, it took somebody else being like, I recognize this in you, and I love you, and I want you to get help. And so I did get counseling, and that helped, particularly with the bulimic side of it. I stopped, and I still, like I said, I struggled with still my body image and wanting to keep my athletic body. And I know from talking to a lot of patients, this is true. I just wanted to keep my athletic body. And so I over exercised for years until I had my sixth baby. Wow. And then I was like, I'm done. Yeah, that's a long time, right? Until I had my sixth baby. So a lot of years of just really worrying still about exercise. And when I had my sixth baby, I'll never forget. I just said, I'm done. I'm done waking up every day wondering if I'm going to be a different person if I don't do this thing. I know that that's not healthy. If I miss 2 days of exercise and I'm obsessing about that and I'm worrying about that, that's not healthy, because I'm worrying that I'm going to be somebody else. I'm not going to be Teresa anymore. Right. And I knew that wasn't right. And so I just completely stopped exercising. And I often joke, like, and I'm still not exercising like 12 years later. So maybe I need to rewind a little bit, but it was really helpful for me. And I felt a peace in myself, and I didn't change. I am Teresa still. And, my body didn't change. I mean, it did in some ways, but not in a way that I thought. And I realized, like, so many women like obsess, like, and they worry about what's going to happen if I don't do these things. And the reality is that's not a healthy place to be.
Totally. Yeah, Teresa, I can relate to you big time on a lot of that. I think there's some pressure, not just for athletes, definitely for athletes, but in college and in high school even and beyond, but just in general. But I think the thing that we have in common is that we both were athletes. And so in high school, I never had one concern about body weight ever. Like my friends didn't have any sort of eating disorder thing. It was never really a thought to me. It's just something that other people struggle with, not me. And I remember there'd be times, like every Sunday, my dad would get donuts. I'd eat so many donuts, and that's fine. Like, I just never had an issue. And it was never a big deal. And I remember when I went to college and I ran at a smaller school my first year and then transferred as a sophomore. But I remember so vividly that the athletes were very concerned with their body image. I don't know. I can't say for sure if I would have become obsessed with my body if it hadn't been for that introduction or that kind of noise around me. It's no one's fault, of course. But there was something definitely to this marked like sense of like my own evaluation of my body that started becoming obsessive. I remember I had a friend who it was bizarre. I thinking back on this, I'm like, man, she was very thin and fit, very like muscular. And she had a six-pack, amazing six-pack. I was just like this kind of like a smaller woman. My parents are smaller, I'm smaller, but in terms of like being chiseled or whatever. So I just remember her all the time. Anytime she'd come to my dorm room, every single time past the full-length mirror, every time she'd lift up her shirt and she'd look at her abs. Every single time. And I thought, that's interesting. At first I thought it was kind of weird, but what she started doing and saying all the time, she's like, I'm so fat. I'm thinking, what? Like, you have a total six-pack. I mean, you're not fat. Look at this. She'd squeeze her sides. And I'm thinking, that's weird, but it happened all the time. And then I started looking at my stomach. I'm like, well, I don't have a six-pack. So if she thinks she's fat, then I must be like total, which obviously is crazy and absurd, but like for a young woman aged 18, 19, however I was, you hear something over and over and over and over and over, and you think, wow. So I started thinking more about food, and I started thinking about the way I physically looked, looking at myself more in the mirror, which then that started to derail me. I feel like that's kind of the starting point. And then later on in the year, there were other athletes on the team that struggled with eating. And so I remember one of my friends said, sometimes, I puke it up when I don't feel good about myself. And I thought, interesting. And I always thought that that would be not a good thing, bad. You see it in movies and whatever. But I thought, she seems normal and she seems fit too. And at the time I had a track injury, so I couldn't run. So I was gaining weight, or I was getting, not as firm, in terms of my muscles and definition and all that. And so I thought, well, maybe I could just do that a couple times, or like just to help me manage my weight because I have an injury. And so I remember this one time my roommate was gone for something, and she had a bunch of food in her cabinet, and I just went to town. And it was the first time I remember just going to town, because I was actually quite depressed because I couldn't run. And I, like you, had this obsession with exercise. I don't know, to the extreme where it'd be hours and hours and hours. But like, if I couldn't exercise, who was I? Like, who, this idea of like, people are looking at me and I get attention almost if I look fit, and I won't if I don't, mm-hmm. But what ended up happening is I started gaining a lot of weight because I started filling my void, this depression, with food. And so what started off as just like this really, I don't know, this observation of how people view their body. And then I started seeing it myself in my own body. And I started eating to fill a void and started feeling relief when I could get rid of it. And so I thought that would help me maintain my weight. In reality, I gained so much weight through that. And it was a major struggle. And it was me and this other friend who also had that same issue, but it's not like we were, it's kind of weird. It was definitely not a healthy friendship. She's a great person, but she had her own struggles, and I wasn't hearing that I should stop, like, so she knew and no one else did. My parents didn't know, she knew, no one else. So it was just a really dark time. I just remember feeling so depressed, hated wearing like any sort of cloth that touched my skin. I hated it, like a shirt that would touch any part of my skin. I felt like I was being claustrophobic, and just this really sense of low self-confidence. It was a very depressing time. And it wasn't until I went to a counselor. So that summer, I decided to transfer to a different school, and I walked on to a track team. That was a Division I track team. And I walked on, I thought, okay, I'm going to transfer schools, because the other place was just really hard. Transferred. And I remember being so self-conscious because I did not look like the other girls. Like I had a good 30 or 40 pounds heavier, than right now I'm pregnant, but like my normal weight, I probably weighed a lot more. And so walked onto the team. I thought, okay, I'm going to just give this a try. And between that time in the summer, somehow God helped me. Not somehow, he did. There was like a miracle. There was a moment where I just knew that if I was going to binge, I just shouldn't vomit it out, So before I actually walked on, I made a commitment to myself, because I knew it was bad. I knew it was poison. I got kind of this sense of it. I told my sister, she started crying, and I thought, wow, this is really serious. So I know I'm kind of going in circles, but I forgot to tell you the most important part, that I decided, like, I'm not going to do that. It was just my own self-will. But when I went and walked onto this other team, I was running, and a few months into the walk-on experience, I got injured again, went to the counselor on campus, and I said, listen, I've had an eating disorder, and I'm afraid I'm going to start gaining a bunch of weight. And he said to me something I'll never forget. He said, do you have strong friendships here at college and school? I said, yeah. He's like, do you feel like these friends are healthier friends than the friends you had in the old college? And I said, yeah. Are you doing well in class? Like, how do you feel about your life? I said, no, I feel good about things. And he told me, he's like, you will not have a problem anymore. And it was like someone had to tell me that I wasn't going to have an issue. He just said, the reason you likely struggled before is because of a depression. You were feeling a void. You didn't have strong friends. Your faith wasn't, he didn't talk about faith really, but like for me, my faith was not where it was when I transferred. And he just said, it's not going to be an issue for you. And there's something about the finality. And he was taking a big gamble by talking to me like in that finality way, but I'm so thankful he did. You're not going to. And of course I did a little bit, but I stopped. Like I didn't ever do that. And so throughout the year, I got healthy, lost weight, health in a healthy way. But I just started noticing just again, the people around me and the team having these eating issues. And I just had to take my focus and narrow it in. But it honestly was that counselor telling me, you're not going to have that issue. I'm like, oh, I'm not okay, good. And of course it followed me throughout my college experience, like in terms of the temptation, the super strong temptation. But I just had to pray to God, like, Lord, because I still struggled with binge eating. Please, Lord, please, Lord, don't let me get rid of this. Like, let me just learn how crappy I feel right now, because that's what I needed. I needed to feel the crappy feeling of eating way too much, right? Because if you're vomiting things out, you feel relief. Mm-hmm. And so I just let myself feel crappy. And then eventually, I honestly, by the grace of God, truly, it's like he healed me somehow just from that experience of that counselor.
That's it's really interesting. And kind of, I guess when I'm looking at our two stories too, Jamie, and seeing the similarities basically, I think the emotional part of it is really the key piece. Like I think we're in situations where our friendships weren't strong. Like I didn't feel like I had the type of friendships I had before I went to college, I didn't have anymore. And in the faith aspect was a part of it too. I think I needed that and I didn't have that. And I forgot that I had, and because you had mentioned almost someone introduced you to the idea of bulimia, but I'll never forget that same thing happened to me. I was in my community bathroom one day and I was in nursing school and there was a classmate of mine and she was next to me in the stall. And I remember hearing it. And she was throwing up. And I remember thinking, what is she doing? Oh my gosh, I'm catching her doing this. And I remember how sick she looked in the face afterwards and thinking, wow, like that really happens. Yeah. So, it's just interesting how important it is for us to feel loved, again, to not have these voids, to not feel this lowness about who we are and how good we are and how valuable we are. And, because when we feel that lowness and we don't have the support around us, we tend to want to fill those voids with something else. And a lot of those things can be negative. 100%. And of course, the culture tells us that, our bodies are supposed to look a certain way. And I think of the Super Bowl, like, I think it was last year or 2 years ago with Jennifer Lopez and the girl here we are like showing, the entire world, these two women. Are they beautiful? Yes, they're beautiful. But to every little girl out there watching that and seeing them use their body that way and show their body that way, how unfortunate it is that a woman has to live up to that as the expectation of what is beautiful. That makes my heart sad because so many women will never live up to that. Right. And they then feel this inadequacy in themselves. And especially when it comes to what we talk about, Jamie, just in terms of our hormones, all of us desire relationship with another human being. And of course, most of us will go on to marry somebody. And all of us, when we're young, what do we think about? When we're young women is, will anybody want to marry me? Yeah. Will anybody love me for who I am? And so these deep kind of voids that we carry in emotional issues, we just want to be loved and we just are trying to figure everything out. And so many young women struggle with this. But ultimately that's the key ending is that we all desire to be in communion with another person. And I think if we understand that and we have this awareness and we're able to share where our hearts are and where these voids are, and then support each other as women and tell each other, you are good, you are valuable, you are beautiful the way you are, the way God made you, then maybe we wouldn't feel like we have to do these other things to try to become somebody we're not.
Right. And I think too, there's this temperament bit of it as well. I think, there's this sense of control, and control feels good. Like when we have a sense of power over anything, we feel good. It's kind of, in terms of survival, you need some sort of sense of power to survive, and I think it's just this innate sense to control and to have power that gives us some like this ability to feel at ease. And so I sense that, and again, I'm making a blanket statement, and this isn't always true, but for me personally, I'm more type A, definitely. And so to be able to control something or have that power, like I still want that power. It just comes out in other ways, And so knowing that where's the root of that, we talked about our emotional issues and friendship, but I also just think in terms of our temperament, or not, I don't even say temperament, but our tendencies to want to control. I think that's also really important to think about as well.
So as we've shared our stories now, Jamie, but we do want to just mention that this does affect health for so many women, and it affects our cycles and our hormones. So I just want to talk just for briefly about what can happen when women are in a situation where they have an eating disorder or they're very obsessed with their body image, because not every woman, but many of those women may lose their menstrual cycle because of it. It's something called, amenorrhea. It's caused by a dysfunction of the hypothalamus communicating with the ovaries. And it happens because when a woman is under such severe stress, and she's also lost enough body fat, that her body is signaling to herself that she cannot be capable of producing a child at that time. So it's going to shut down what we call the fertility pacemaker and your hormones, basically. And so a lot of those women will go into just not having periods at all. And I've worked with many of these women, and it can be a really challenging condition. And we'll have to probably I know we interviewed somebody about this condition a little bit, Jamie, so that'll be coming up, but we may need to do even another episode because it is very challenging. I mean, you have all of these emotional issues, and you've got the, how much can you exercise? How are you supposed to eat? But then you have somebody who isn't having their periods anymore. And how do we restore that? And I just would say it's not easy. Right. It's not easy to restore. Mm-hmm. Once you shut down the fertility pacemaker and you don't have periods at all, it's hard to bring that back. Mm-hmm. Because I work with women and I try, and it's not an easy condition to solve. So from that standpoint, now I myself don't remember, having amenorrhea, but I remember having irregular cycles, definitely in college, and not getting my period regularly. And I struggled with acne as well. And of course I went to a doctor and ended up being offered the birth control pill, and took it for a few months, gained 20 pounds, I think 15, 20 pounds, and was like, well, I'm done with that. So, a lot of times women in this situation, especially when they're away from college, they're like, what am I supposed to do? They go to a doctor. And again, they're not getting the answers about why is this happening? Right. How can I balance my body and my hormones? Right. So I don't know what your experience was with your cycles, but.
Yeah, I never lost my cycle. And I think it's because I had gained so much weight. I wasn't, it wasn't like an anorexic sort of thing. It was me gaining a lot of weight and having this really massive like self-consciousness about the way I look because of that, filling a void. But there was an athlete, a friend of mine, who was not getting her period. She was super skinny. I don't know if she had an eating disorder or not. She's really small. And the doctor prescribed birth control. And I remember her going to practice and saying, my mom does not feel comfortable with me being on the birth control pill. And so we can't do it. And I just remember, like, myself included, being like, but you need it though. Like, I didn't know. But you need it, but it's bad because the doctor was nervous for her bones. And that makes sense because when we do not have enough body fat, estrogen is stored in body fat, then our bones take a toll. Same thing like when we go through menopause as women, our estrogen kind of plummets down and now our bones are at risk for osteopenia, osteoporosis. Same thing's true when we're young and we're not getting our period. We don't have proper body fat, estrogen levels. And so this friend of mine heard a doctor was nervous for her bone health. But in reality, what she did instead was start eating more and started taking a vitamin D supplement. I'll just never forget. And then she didn't ever need to be on the birth control pill, but it was as though that was her only option. So I can't imagine the number of gals who are like, oh, there's something wrong with me. I don't have my period. Oh, I'm going to go to the doctor because I don't have my period. Well, maybe it's because we're not eating enough. Maybe there's something underlying that really needs to be addressed, because that birth control pill is not going to fix the lack of, healthy eating and mood issues that may be causing that struggle.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point about that. I mean, it is important to protect the bones, but people do wonder then, if you can't take the birth control, or you don't want to take the birth control pill because it's synthetic hormones, is there another option? And the answer is yes. I mean, I do treat women in this situation with bioidentical hormones to support their bones. Sometimes we've just got to do that. It's been too long that the body's not had those hormones available. And you can use bioidentical progesterone and bioidentical estrogen forms that do support the body and do support the bones. So just so you know, there are other options. But like Jamie said, restoration a lot of times comes down to lifestyle, and gaining some fat is important for many of these women. But here's the key. And I've worked with a couple of women where, again, this exercise piece can be so delicate, and it almost has to be that it has to be stopped, like almost completely. And that can be super hard. Again, for the same reason what I went through is just this like, oh my gosh, I have to exercise every day, so it can be that you have to tell the brain and the body that this thing that's happening is not, I'm not running from the bear anymore. I'm not running from the bear anymore. I'm not running from the bear anymore. And in order to tell the body you're not running from the bear, you literally have to stop running.
Right. Yeah.
And just start doing leisurely walks and maybe some gentle stretching daily. And so if anyone's out there listening and you're not having your period and you are in the situation where you're like still running and still lifting weights and still doing cross training and intense exercise, you may have to stop to get your periods back. And so what we do in lifestyle ultimately is so important. But just know there are holistic healthcare providers that want to help you. And it is a very holistic thing that needs to happen with your body. So reach out to those providers, fertilitycare.org, managingyourfertility.com. Facts also has a list of doctors who are trained in holistic or restorative women's health. And there's not that many out there, but they are there, and we can help you find them.
And I do just want to say too, like, it seems like now at this age, as compared to when we were younger, that a lot of the friends gal pals that I'm friends with, they struggle more with the overeating and the binge eating sort of thing. And I also want to say this too, that if you are struggling with either one, counseling is very important. Number two, there is a book that I read that I think it would apply either way, whatever the eating struggle is, the body image struggle, but it's called Life Without Ed. And ED meaning eating disorder. So it's like you personify these tendencies where you literally separate yourself from this temptation to eat a whole pie, for instance, and be like, Ed, get out of my head, or if you want to run, but it seems a little absurd, Ed, get out of my head. So it's Life Without Ed. And then the author, I'm going to look it up here. It is Jenny Schaefer. Life Without Ed, Jenny Schaefer. I remember reading that book and it was really helpful to me. One other thing too is this, when in life we experience extreme stress. So we're talking about like the stress effect on the body. But what I want to share is this idea of, if something traumatic happens to you, maybe there's a car accident, maybe somebody died, whatever the case is, it is a tendency for most people to go to something to provide comfort. So whether that's alcohol, whether that's food, shopping, spending money, whatever the case is. In those moments of extreme stress, traumatic stress, it is much more likely that you can get addicted to that thing that you start during the trauma. Because the trauma is so hard for you and for anyone, the body wants to relieve itself of stress. And so the thing that you attach yourself to provides comfort to the body. And so that's not great though, because if the things we're going to provide that provides comfort to us is harmful to our body, that's not great. So me knowing that now always really helps. Any friend who struggles, I could say, okay, listen, if your tendency is to go for the food or for the alcohol or for the spending, just know right now, don't try not to do that right now. Like, drink your alcohol when you're not totally traumatized. Eat your pie when you're not totally traumatized, because your body's going to remember the way it makes you feel. It's going to want to feel that again and again and again anytime you have that thought that comes up. I wanted to say that before this episode's wrapped up, because I'll never forget that as advice for that I received, during an especially hard time.
That is like incredible advice, Jamie. So I really appreciate you saying that. So this has been a really great episode. And I hope that a lot of you out there can feel connected to Jamie and I, and to know that, we're just humans too. We're just people that struggled with the same things that you might struggle with. And so we want to continue to share our stories and have you reach out to us with your stories. We want to hear from you. So email us at thehormonegenius@gmail.com. And, just let us know you're out there, and that you appreciate, hearing our stories and getting some empowering information. If you are struggling, please reach out to a healthcare provider, get some counseling. It helped both Jamie and I, so it's an important piece. Also, if you have a friend and you know that a friend is struggling, like for me, I needed someone to tell me you have a problem in order to get help. So do not be afraid to reach out to someone with love and compassion to say that I think you might have a problem. Sometimes that's the first step in somebody making the journey towards health again. So that's really important. And then lastly, just remember that you are loved. You are loved by a divine creator that loves you more than anything else. And we love you, and you are valuable and worth so much more. So do not look at yourself and ever say, I'm too this, I'm too that. Know that you are good and beautiful just the way you are. And we want to continue to support and give you what you need to be a healthy young woman.
Amen. Thanks, Teresa. All right. Thanks, guys.